He called 911, then disappeared forever. In the quiet town of Pine Hollow, a frantic 911 call in the dead of night marked the beginning of a mystery unlike anything detectives had ever faced. 25-year-old Daniel Mercer vanished without a trace. His pickup truck left running on an empty roadside, wallet and phone untouched. The only clue, a chilling, muffled plea for help, and the sound of 3 slow knocks, followed by a 4th. As Detective Mara Keene digs into Daniel's disappearance, the investigation unravels a disturbing pattern. Other missing persons with eerily similar last moments, all tied to an unspoken local legend. Forensic evidence turns up strange fingerprints, distorted video footage, and sightings of the missing walking the streets long after they were gone. Each lead pulls her closer to an impossible truth. Something is out there, wearing the faces of those it takes. But when the horror begins following Mara, inside her own precinct, in the woods, and even in her dreams, the case becomes personal. Each encounter brings her closer to the thing that's been watching all along, waiting for the moment to replace her. And as the line between hunter and hunted blurs, Mara realizes the most terrifying part of this case isn't catching the thing that took them. It's knowing whether she's still herself. Started with a phone call that lasted just 47 seconds. At 2:13 a.m., the county's emergency dispatch received a frantic, muffled plea for help from a young man who refused to give his name. In the background, there was the sound of heavy breathing and a faint knocking, then silence. When officers arrived at the GPS location, an isolated stretch of road on the outskirts of Pine Hollow, they found an abandoned Ford pickup still running, driver's door open, hazard lights flashing. The seat was warm. A wallet and phone sat neatly on the passenger seat. There were no footprints, no tire tracks leading away. It was as if the driver had stepped out and simply vanished. 2 days later, Detective Mara Keene stood at the same roadside, her breath visible in the early morning fog. The only new development was the discovery of a single boot, half buried in the frozen ditch, belonging to 25-year-old Daniel Mercer, a local handyman with no criminal record and a reputation for helping anyone who asked. His parents swore he'd never just walk away. His sister insisted he'd been scared of something in the weeks before he disappeared, but no one knew what. Through interviews and security footage, investigators pieced together Daniel's last hours. At 11:48 p.m., he was seen buying gas and coffee at a roadside station. The clerk remembered him looking over his shoulder constantly, flinching when the automatic door chime rang. A dashcam from a passing truck caught his pickup parked at the roadside at 2:05 a.m., hazards already blinking, and what looked like a dark figure standing 10 feet behind the vehicle, motionless. Detective Keene brought in forensic teams, who scanned the truck for prints and fibers. They found smudges on the inside of the driver's door, too large to be Daniel's, and microscopic traces of ash that didn't match his home or workplace. The phone's last video, never sent, was even stranger. It showed the dark outline of trees rushing past, Daniel's trembling voice saying, "It's here again. I don't think it wants to let me go this time." Locals whispered about the Mercer family's land at the edge of Pine Hollow, where old barns stood locked and windows were boarded. Teens dared each other to sneak inside, but claimed they always heard footsteps following them, even when no one was there. Daniel's childhood friend revealed to detectives that the two had found something buried under the barn floorboards as kids. A wooden box filled with handwritten notes, each one reading only, "Don't look at it." They'd buried the box again and never spoke of it. Search teams combed the property. In the barn's loft, they found a fresh indentation in the dust, human-shaped, as though someone had been lying there watching the door. Beneath the floorboards, they recovered the box. Inside were the same notes, but this time, each was scrawled in Daniel's handwriting, dated over the last month. The investigation spiraled. Forensic handwriting experts confirmed the notes were authentic, but Daniel's family swore they hadn't seen him write anything. A neighbor reported seeing someone at Daniel's bedroom window late at night. Someone who looked like him, but thinner, paler, unmoving. The final lead came from a game trail camera set half a mile from the truck. At exactly 2:14 a.m., 1 minute after Daniel's 911 call, the footage showed him running toward the camera, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream. Something was just behind him. Not a person, but a tall, distorted silhouette, its head tilting unnaturally as if listening to his breath. The footage cut to static before he reached the lens. Detective Keene sat in her office days later, reviewing the evidence one last time, when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the grainy reflection on the truck's rearview mirror, just before Daniel vanished, his own face was staring back at him from outside the vehicle. That night, Keene's phone rang. A muffled voice whispered, "Help me," followed by the same faint knocking heard in Daniel's call, and then silence. Detective Mara Keene didn't sleep the night after the call. She played the audio on loop, isolating the background noise, 3 slow knocks, then a pause, then one more knock. The same rhythm Daniel's sister claimed he used when arriving home as a teenager. Forensics traced the call to a cell tower 3 miles from where Daniel's truck was found, but there was no road access, just dense pine forest, overgrown trails, and the black water of Marrow Creek. Keene assembled a search team at dawn. Among them was Eddie Lockhart, a local volunteer with a hunting dog. Eddie swore he'd heard about the Mercer thing his whole life. Stories of people seeing someone they knew, only to realize later that person had been somewhere else entirely. They trekked into the forest, the cold pressing in around them. The dog's ears flattened as they reached the creek. On the far bank, half hidden in the fog, was a collapsed wooden shack. Its door was missing, replaced by a crude plank nailed across the opening. Carved into the wood, in jagged, uneven strokes, were the words, "Don't answer." Inside, they found more of the handwritten notes. Identical paper, identical ink, strewn across the dirt floor. Some were shredded as if clawed. Others were pinned to the walls, overlapping, forming a suffocating wallpaper of warnings. In the center of the shack sat a chair. Duct taped to the armrest was Daniel's driver's license. Keene crouched to examine it, but the hunting dog began to whine, low, urgent, almost human in tone. Eddie muttered a prayer. From deeper in the forest came the same 3 knocks. This time, there was no pause before the 4th. The sound was closer than before. They retreated toward the creek. But Keene's radio crackled to life with a voice so distorted it was almost mechanical. "You have to let me back in. Back at headquarters." Keene ordered the shack sealed off and forensics to analyze everything. The prints on the driver's license matched Daniel's, but were dated as if they'd been left only hours ago. That evening, she went over the trail cam footage again. There was something she hadn't noticed before. After Daniel vanished from frame, the tall, distorted silhouette turned toward the camera and smiled. The mouth was too wide. 2 nights later, Eddie Lockhart failed to check in after a solo hunting trip near the same woods. His truck was found on the roadside, still running, driver's door open, hazard lights blinking. On the seat was his phone. The screen showed an unsent video of Eddie, whispering, "I think it followed me home." Behind him, in the darkness of his living room, was a second figure, his exact double, standing perfectly still. Detective Mara Keene barely had time to process Eddie's disappearance before her phone rang again. No caller ID, just a breathless whisper, "It's not me." The line went dead. She pulled every available officer into a sweep of Eddie's home. The front door was locked from the inside. The living room was untouched, except for the faint smell of damp earth. In the hallway, boot prints trailed toward the back door, stopping abruptly at the center of the kitchen, as if whoever made them had simply vanished mid-step. Eddie's unsent video was recovered in full. It ended with the second figure, a perfect double, taking one slow step forward before the screen went black. No sound, no struggle. Forensic analysis revealed something unnerving. The double wasn't a perfect match. The skin was fractionally too pale, the eyes fractionally too wide, the head tilted in that same unnatural way as the silhouette from the trail cam. The locals were panicking now. Some swore they'd seen Daniel walking down Main Street at night, staring into shop windows. Others claimed Eddie had been at the gas station, standing in the parking lot for hours without moving, until he simply wasn't there anymore. Keene began to suspect the connection wasn't just between Daniel and Eddie. It was between all of them. She found an old police file from 1989. a nearly identical disappearance involving a man named Jonah Rourke. His last words on a 911 call were, "Don't let it wear my face." In Jonah's case, the lead detective had gone missing, too. Determined not to end the same way, Keene started sleeping at the precinct. But the knocks followed her there. 3 slow knocks. Then the 4th. On the 3rd night, she woke at her desk to the sound of papers shuffling in the dark. Her flashlight beam swept across the evidence board and froze. Every photo of Daniel, Eddie, and Jonah had been replaced with a single image. Mara herself, asleep at her desk, taken from only a few feet away. Her phone buzzed. A video message. She pressed play, and her own face filled the screen. Her voice said, calm and deliberate, "I'm already inside." Behind her, in the video, the door to the precinct hallway began to open. Detective Mara Keene stared at the video, pulse hammering. She was still in the precinct, still alone, or so she thought. The hallway door in the video creaked wider. In the frame, the other Mara stepped through, moving with an eerie slowness, head tilting at that impossible angle. Her eyes were all wrong. Too dark, too deep, reflecting light like an animal's in the night. Keene's own office door was closed. But now, in the silence, she heard it. 3 slow knocks. Pause. Then the 4th. She drew her weapon, her breathing loud in her ears. The knocking stopped. A shadow slid across the gap beneath the door. The overhead lights flickered, plunging the room into half-darkness. Every framed case photo on her wall began to curl, edges lifting as if an invisible heat were pressing from behind. Beneath each photo, fresh handwriting bled through the paper. Words that hadn't been there before. "Let me back in." Dispatch radioed in. Motion sensors had been tripped at Eddie's shack in the woods. But the timestamp didn't make sense. It showed the alert happening 20 minutes from now. Keene left the precinct immediately, headlights cutting through the mist as she drove toward the shack. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. She glanced at the screen, live video streaming from her own desk at the precinct. The camera showed her office door, knocking. Then the door opened, revealing her. The stream ended. She arrived at the shack to find the nailed plank torn away. Inside, the duct-taped chair sat empty. But there was something else now. In the middle of the dirt floor, a phone lay face up, still recording. On its screen, grainy night vision footage of Daniel, Eddie, and Jonah Rourke. All 3 stood in a tight circle, unmoving, heads tilted in perfect unison toward the lens. Then they turned, slowly together, and smiled. From behind Mara, in the trees, came the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Too many for one person, too synchronized to be random. The footsteps stopped just at the tree line, and in the darkness, something whispered her name. "Who's there?" Mara's voice cracked against the weight of the silence. The trees didn't answer, at least not in words. Instead, the 3 figures from the video stepped out of the darkness. Daniel, Eddie, Jonah. Up close, their faces were almost right. Skin too smooth in places, too stretched in others, eyes that didn't blink. Their smiles didn't falter, even as they moved in unison. Each footstep perfectly matched. Mara's hand tightened on her gun. "Stay where you are." None of them stopped. The air grew colder with every step they took, frost blooming across the edges of the shack's doorway. From the corner of her vision, Mara saw the phone on the ground light up again. A live feed. It showed her, standing in the shack. Same jacket, same gun, but her face was blank, eyes solid black. Behind her double, Daniel, Eddie, and Jonah were smiling the same impossible smiles. The Mara in the video leaned forward toward the camera and whispered, "You can't tell which one is you anymore." A snapping sound broke through the night with splintering. Mara looked back to the tree-line. More shapes were emerging, dozens of them. Every face was familiar. People from Pine Hollow, some alive, some long dead, but all wearing the same fixed grin. They began to fan out, surrounding the shack. The figures stopped just short of the light spilling from the doorway, as though waiting for something. Then Daniel, if it was still Daniel, spoke for the first time. His voice was a perfect copy of Mara's. "It's your turn." The ground beneath her boots gave a sudden, shuddering lurch, as if the earth itself had exhaled. From somewhere deep below, she heard the same four knocks. And then everything went dark. When Mara woke, there was no shack, no forest. Only a black expanse stretching in every direction. The ground felt like wet stone beneath her palms. She stood, her breath quick in the cold air, and saw faint shapes moving in the distance. Their outlines were human, but their movements weren't jerky, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. Mara! The voice came from behind her. She turned and saw herself. This version of Mara wore her badge, her jacket, even the scuff on her left boot. But her skin was pale as wax, eyes pure black. The double smiled. "You've been here before." Mara took a step back. "Where is this?" The double tilted its head, exactly like the figures in the woods. "It's where we wait until someone lets us back in." The blackness shifted. Shapes emerged from the dark. Daniel, Eddie, Jonah, moving slowly, surrounding her. They stopped in perfect formation, heads tilting in unison, smiles widening. "You called for help," the double whispered. "You just didn't know who answered." The air around Mara seemed to thicken, pressing against her chest. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, until she realized it wasn't her heartbeat at all. It was the knocking. 3 slow knocks. Pause. Then the 4th. Only this time it wasn't on a door. It was inside her head. The figures began to speak together, their voices layered and wrong. "Let us in. Let us wear you." Mara staggered back, but the ground under her gave way like ice cracking, and she fell, plunging into a vertical darkness. The last thing she saw above her was her own double leaning over the edge, still smiling. And then she opened her eyes. Back in the precinct, daylight streaming through the blinds. On her desk sat her phone, recording. The screen showed a live feed from her office camera. In the doorway behind her, someone was standing perfectly still. It was her. And the other Mara raised a finger to her lips. "Shoo!" before stepping fully into the room. Mara's first instinct was to reach for her gun. But the other Mara was faster. In 2 long strides, the double was across the office, smiling that impossible smile. Up close, the skin looked wrong. Too smooth, as if it had been poured on rather than grown. The eyes reflected no light at all, as though they were bottomless. "I'm tired of watching," the double said in Mara's voice. "I'm ready to live." She lunged. Mara fired, but the bullet passed through, tearing into the wall behind. The double's form shimmered, flickered, then solidified again. "You can't kill what isn't here," it whispered. The room seemed to ripple. The evidence board, the desk, even the walls warped, their edges bending inward. Mara realized she wasn't really in the precinct anymore. This was something else wearing the shape of her office, just like it was wearing her face. The double reached out, placing a cold hand against Mara's chest. Instantly, her vision blurred, memories flashing. Her first case, her father's voice, the smell of coffee on a winter morning, all ripped away in pieces. She could feel herself being hollowed out. From the corner of the warped room, figures began to emerge. Daniel, Eddie, Jonah, others she didn't know. They were all empty, their faces slack, eyes black voids. "You'll like it here," Daniel said, his voice flat. "No choices, no fear, just the face." The double leaned in, lips nearly brushing her ear. "When I step out there, they won't know the difference. And when they finally do..." Her words trailed off as she turned toward the doorway, where a uniformed officer stood, knocking 3 times, pausing, then knocking once more. "Detective Keene?" the officer called from the hall. "You okay in there?" The double smiled wider and began walking toward the door. Mara tried to move, but her legs wouldn't respond. She could only watch as her own body reached for the handle. And the moment the door opened, the scene shattered into darkness. When her vision returned, Mara was standing in the middle of Main Street, surrounded by people, all of them smiling, all of them wearing faces she recognized. Every single one turned to look at her, and in unison they spoke. "We let you in." Mara's pulse thundered in her ears as the crowd closed in, their identical smiles never faltering. She turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. Every street, every sidewalk, every doorway was filled with them. Teachers, shop owners, children clutching their parents' hands. All of them perfect copies, except for the eyes. A voice behind her said, "It's easier if you stop fighting." She spun around. It was her father, except he'd been dead for 10 years. His eyes were as black as the rest. "We've been here longer than you think," he said, stepping closer. "Long enough to know how you'll end." The sky above Pine Hollow began to dim unnaturally, like a shadow swallowing the sun. Street lamps flickered to life, casting everyone in a pale, sickly glow. The air thickened until it felt like breathing through wet cloth. One by one, the crowd began to tilt their heads in the same slow, unnatural motion. Then, without breaking their smiles, they stepped aside, creating a narrow path down the center of the street. At the far end stood another Mara. She wasn't smiling. She looked terrified. "Mara, that's not you," she screamed. "You have to." Before she could finish, two smiling citizens gripped her arms and pulled her into the shadows. Her scream was cut short, replaced by the sound Mara now knew too well. 3 slow knocks. Pause. Then the 4th. When the crowd stepped back into place, the other Mara emerged again. Calm, collected, no fear in her eyes. She walked toward the real Mara, stopping just inches away. "They'll believe me. They always do." And then she leaned closer, whispering just for her, "You called 911 that night too." Mara's stomach dropped. She didn't remember making that call. But as the words sank in, somewhere far away, a phone began to ring. The crowd's smiles widened.